Many believe that to get rich, you need to make more money. But I realize it's not the lack of money that's making me poorer. It's the unnoticed habits I've been repeating. I thought being smart and having stable income was enough until I checked my bank account and saw how unaware I was of my spending. In this video, I'll reveal 9 financial habits that are quietly draining people's wallets, even those earning hundreds of thousands. And most importantly, I'll show you how to break them starting today. Keep watching to change your financial future. Bad financial habit 1. Paying yourself last. One of the biggest mistakes I made, and I see many people around me repeating, is the habit of paying yourself last. Sounds reasonable, right? You earn money, you pay the bills, buy the necessities, help out your loved ones, and if there's anything left, then you think about saving for yourself. But this mindset kept me from building any significant savings for years. I kept thinking, I'll save if there's anything left at the end of the month. But the truth is, there was never anything left. Needs are endless, while income is limited. And so, month after month, I lived in constant insecurity, always fearing unexpected situations like a broken car, illness, or losing my job because I had no emergency fund. I realized if I kept living like this, I'd always be stuck in a cycle of work, spend, worry, and then work some more. No way out, no freedom, no choices. But then I started learning from those who had truly achieved financial freedom, entrepreneurs like Warren Buffett, who's known for his simple lifestyle and the pay yourself first principle. Or David Bach, the author of The Automatic Millionaire, who pointed out that the secret to wealth isn't big investments, but small disciplines. Setting aside a portion of your income the moment you receive it and automatically transferring it to a savings or investment account. And I began to follow that principle. Every time I received a paycheck, I immediately set aside 10%, sometimes 20%, and transferred it straight into my savings or investment account. I treated it like an unavoidable bill, just like rent or utilities. This forced me to adjust my remaining spending accordingly instead of treating savings as something to do if there's anything left. What were the results? After 6 months, I had an emergency fund that allowed me to sleep soundly every night. After 1 year, I was able to invest in stocks and index funds. And after 3 years, I started having choices, quitting my job when I wanted, traveling whenever I felt like it, and pursuing my own projects without fear of running out of money. Freedom doesn't come last. It comes when you prioritize yourself first. Don't pay yourself last, because if you don't put yourself first, no one will do it for you. Bad financial habit 2. Getting comfortable with bad debt. After I started shedding the pressure of spending to prove myself, I thought I was safe. But no, there was another, more subtle trap I hadn't seen coming. The habit of spending first, paying later. I used to see credit cards as a kind of financial magic wand. An expensive item? No problem, just swipe the card. An unexpected trip? Pay in installments. Everything I wanted, even if I didn't have the money, I could own it in just a few seconds by hitting a button. But behind that comfort was a sweet yet toxic financial trap. I started finding myself stuck in endless bills. Each month, I paid off debt, but the balance stayed the same because the average interest rate was 22%. No matter how hard I tried, I felt like I was swimming in quicksand. The more I struggled, the deeper I sank. Do you know what's the bitterest part? Credit card companies don't need to deceive anyone. They just need us to lack self-control. Our carelessness is their massive profit. I remember a story from Mark Cuban, the billionaire, investor, and owner of the Dallas Mavericks. He once said, "Want to get rich 10% faster? Pay off your credit card debt. 18 to 22% interest is the fastest way to make yourself poor." When someone as successful as him warns you about this, I knew I couldn't continue ignoring it. And I changed. I began practicing a simple rule. If I can't pay for something in cash immediately, I don't buy it. Whether it's new shoes, a bigger TV, or a luxurious weekend getaway, I ask myself, do I really need this? Or am I borrowing from the future to please the present? I'm not saying you shouldn't borrow, but make sure you're in control, not led by the temptation of easy 0% interest installments. Financial freedom doesn't come from wealth, but from discipline and mindfulness in every small decision. Bad habit emergency fund. Once I started controlling my spending and getting out of the consumer debt cycle, I thought I had entered a more stable chapter of my life. But then a storm hit, and I realized I still didn't have an umbrella to shelter under. It was when my mother had a sudden stroke. Ambulance, hospital, medication. Things no one wants to think about, but that can happen at any moment. I sat there, dazed, staring at the medical bills, burdened not only by worry for my mother, but also by the brutal truth. I didn't have a dime to handle it. When you don't have an emergency fund, any crisis, no matter how small, can overwhelm you. Losing a job, an accident, a pandemic, a crisis. Life doesn't knock first before throwing a punch. And if you don't have that cushion, that punch can break you. I wasn't the only one. According to a Bankrate survey, nearly 60% of Americans don't have enough money to cover an emergency expense of just $1,000. A broken glass could break your finances too. But then I remembered a lesson from Susie Orman, the famous financial expert. She once said, "An emergency fund isn't just money. It's freedom. It's the peace of mind knowing that you're not cornered." So I started. Nothing grand. I didn't need thousands of dollars right away. I simply started setting aside 10% of my income every month, regularly, without interruption. I set a goal: accumulate enough to cover 3 to 6 months of living expenses. Gradually, my emergency fund grew, and so did my confidence. Now, I no longer panic when my car breaks down in the middle of the road or when I need an urgent dental appointment. I know I have a safety net. And more importantly, I no longer live in the fear of what if something happens tomorrow. The journey to financial freedom doesn't just start with making money. It also involves preparing for the stormy days. In the next part, I'll share with you a seemingly harmless habit, but one that keeps you stuck in the feeling of where did my money go, not tracking your income and expenses. If you've ever opened your wallet and exclaimed, "Wait, where did all the money go?" then you definitely won't want to miss the next part. Bad habit for not knowing exactly your income and expenses. I once thought that as long as I had a steady income, that was enough. I wasn't wasteful. I didn't live extravagantly. Yet by the end of the month, my wallet was empty, my account had nothing but a few lonely digits. And I couldn't understand, where did my money disappear to? After the health crisis with my mother, I began building my emergency fund. I felt I was making progress. But then another question knocked on my mind every night before bed. Why am I still not saving anything? Then I realized the problem wasn't that I didn't have money. It was that I didn't know exactly where my money was going. I wasn't tracking my income and expenses. I never had a clear spending report. Each month, I just guessed my expenses, forgetting that those vague numbers were silently eating away at my finances. Then I heard the story of Howard Schultz, the former CEO of Starbucks. Before turning Starbucks into a global icon, he lived in a working-class neighborhood in Brooklyn. Howard said he grew up in a family that knew nothing about money management. And it was this experience that fueled his determination to understand every dollar he made and every cent he spent. That foundation allowed him to make big financial decisions later. I started following suit. I downloaded a personal finance management app. There are hundreds of free, user-friendly ones, and began entering every small expense, from a $3 coffee to utility bills, gas money. I created an Excel sheet to track the big picture: how much I was earning, what debts I had, what assets I owned, and my goals for each month, each year. A miracle happened. Just seeing the numbers in black and white on paper, I began changing my spending habits. Expenses that were once invisible now became tangible, clear, and often quite unreasonable. I also learned to distinguish between needs and instant gratification wants. I no longer raised my living standards impulsively every time my income increased. I began asking myself, do I really need this? Because I realized the thing that kills financial freedom isn't a lack of money, but a lack of understanding of where your money is actually going. If you've ever had the feeling of money coming in the front door, flowing out the back without knowing why, you might be letting life control your wallet instead of controlling life. But don't worry. The first step is simply take a look back. Then, step by step, you'll know how to move forward. And in the next part, I'll share with you another subtle trap, a kind of sweet, seductive spending that drains your wallet without you even realizing it. Spending money on overly expensive hobbies. You'll be surprised when you realize hobbies can become a burden if you don't control them. Bad habit 5, spending money on expensive hobbies. I used to believe life is meant to be enjoyed. And I wasn't wrong. But what I was wrong about was how to enjoy it. I had hobbies that seemed reasonable, but which invisibly consumed my finances. From collecting watches, shopping for seasonal clothes, to traveling in first-class tickets for trips I rarely took without premium status. I call these rewards for my hard work. I thought I deserved it. But then one day, when I compared my newly created expense report, I suddenly realized, in just 3 months, I'd spent nearly a third of my income on short-term pleasures. And more seriously, I no longer saw spending money as a choice. It had become an automatic habit, as though my hobbies were driving the wallet, not me. I recall the story of Kevin O'Leary, the famous investor from Shark Tank. He once shared, "Before you buy anything, ask yourself, is this a need or an ego booster?" Kevin was once passionate about sports cars, but when he began pursuing financial freedom seriously, he decided to stop because he understood hobbies do not create wealth. They should be rewards, not habits. I started asking myself that question before every spending decision. I replaced weekend shopping trips with reading books and listening to personal finance podcasts. Instead of seeking luxurious pleasures, I learned to enjoy the simple things: a cup of coffee I brewed myself on the balcony, a walk in the park near my house, or simply a day where I didn't spend a single penny but still felt at peace. I didn't give up all my hobbies. I just learned how to pause and choose. Sometimes I still bought the things I liked, but only after planning and achieving a small financial goal. At that point, the joy felt more meaningful, no longer accompanied by guilt or anxiety. Because I understood that hobbies are only truly valuable when they don't cost us our financial freedom. If you find yourself always working hard, but never saving a dime, try reflecting on how many of those expenses are expensive pleasures you thought were worth it. Sometimes what we really need isn't a new hobby, but a new perspective to realize that true wealth begins with the ability to control oneself. In the next section, I'll share a financial mistake I made for a long time, focusing too much on saving, while forgetting that increasing income is the broader path. Are you ready for the next shift? Bad habit 6, focusing only on saving. Ignoring income growth. I used to be the type of person who was always proud of my saving ability. I compared prices on every item, hunted for discount codes every weekend, and knew exactly when Starbucks had a buy one get one offer. I thought, if I just saved diligently, sooner or later, I'd make it. But one day, I looked back and realized, after years of tightening my belt, my savings account was only enough to cover a few months of expenses, not enough to change my life. I once read a quote by Grant Cardone, a self-made millionaire, that said, "You can't save your way to wealth. You have to earn more, period." At first, I thought it sounded a bit extreme, but the more I lived, the more I understood. Saving has its limits, but income, if you dare to think differently and take action, can be limitless. And that's the lesson I learned after seeing myself, no matter how much I tried to cut back, still feeling like I was always falling short. I started to change. Instead of just looking for coupons, I started looking for new skills. Instead of spending hours hunting for sales, I spent that time building a small freelance job based on my writing skills. I learned to treat time as an asset, not as something free. I know some people will think I don't have any special skills, but did you know? Barbara Corcoran, the founder of a multi-million-dollar real estate empire, started out as a secretary, and only by constantly upgrading herself did she create an entirely new path. I'm not saying you have to quit your job or become a millionaire in a year, but start by expanding your financial mindset. It could be taking on a weekend job. It could be making a small investment in index funds. Or simply, stop thinking I can't and start asking, what can I learn? Because if you only try to save within your current income limits, you're playing a defensive game for life. True wealth is when you dare to play on offense. And after I learned how to increase my income, I hit another barrier, one I hadn't realized before. I was paying too much in taxes simply because I was ignorant. Would you like to know how the rich keep more of their money while staying within the law. Wait for me in the next section. This will be a conversation well worth having. Bad habit 7. Paying too much tax. Just because you don't know the law. After I started increasing my income, I thought I had stepped up a new level in my financial journey. But then tax season came, and I realized something painful. I had worked hard all year, only to send a large chunk of that money right back to the government. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know what else I could do. I used to think, well, everyone has to pay taxes. But then I happened to read a quote from Robert Kiyosaki, author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, that said, "The rich don't avoid taxes. They just know the law better than others." I started learning more. And do you know what shocked me the most? The rich, even though they earn 10 or 100 times more than I do, sometimes pay a lower tax rate. Of course, they don't do anything illegal. They just understand the law and know how to use legal tools like small businesses, tax-advantaged investment accounts, and deductions. For example, in the US, if you invest through a Roth IRA, a type of retirement account, your investment returns will be tax-free for life. Or, if you run a business, many expenses from laptops to travel costs can be considered valid expenses and deducted. I'm not an accountant, nor am I someone who enjoys calculations. But as I started learning gradually, I understood that every dollar I keep is a dollar I don't have to earn again. I thought of Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon. For many years, he didn't have to pay personal income taxes because he knew how to use stock options instead of salary to receive his financial rewards. Of course, none of us are Jeff Bezos, but the principle remains the same. The smart ones don't just know how to make money, they know how to keep money. I began speaking with financial advisors, reading books, and following YouTube channels dedicated to tax optimization. Every small piece of knowledge I gained, from choosing the right type of investment account to understanding personal exemptions, helped me keep more. And if you think, I don't care, I'll just pay the taxes I owe, then remember this: when you save more, you can do more. You can use that money to invest in your children, help your loved ones, or simply live a life with less stress. If you don't agree with tax optimization, that's fine, but let that saved money serve the things you believe in, supporting charities, community programs, or anything that gives you meaning. After I learned how to manage money, I discovered something interesting. Even though I had money, I still wasn't brave enough to invest. What was the reason? Let me tell you in the next part about the invisible fear that kept me stuck while the market didn't wait for anyone. Bad habit 8. Procrastinating investment. Letting money sleep and lose value. I once thought, as long as I have savings, that's enough. And indeed, having an emergency fund gave me peace of mind when life threw unexpected challenges. But after a few years, I took a look at my bank account and discovered a cold truth. My money was still sitting there, but its value was quietly decreasing every day because of inflation. I wasn't willing to invest because I was afraid. I was afraid of choosing the wrong stocks, afraid the market might crash, afraid of losing all the money I worked so hard to earn. And that fear made me stand still while opportunities passed by. I'll never forget a quote by Warren Buffett, the legendary American investor. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. I began to change with one simple idea: not to invest recklessly, but to invest wisely. I didn't need to be a financial genius to start. I only needed to start with what I understood. I began with index funds that mirror the broader market, which are lower risk and suitable for beginners like me. I learned how to break my investments into small, manageable amounts each month, dollar cost averaging, so I wouldn't have to fear market fluctuations. I didn't try to time the market. I followed the path of people like Tony Robbins, who interviewed hundreds of the world's best investors in his book Money, Master the Game. He said, "Not investing is the riskiest thing you can do." I began to see my money not just as something to spend, but as something that could work for me. One of the biggest inspirations for me was Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx. She started her company with just $5,000 and a strong belief in herself. She wasn't an investment expert, but she understood this. Money should be used to grow, not hidden away. And when I started investing regularly, even if it was just small amounts, I realized something wonderful. I was no longer relying on luck. Time became my ally. Compound interest began to work its magic. And gradually, The fear inside me receded, making way for proactive action. If you're hesitating, if you're worried, I just want to say one thing. Start with knowledge. Because if you let fear hold you back, you'll never escape the vicious cycle of earning money, saving money, only to watch it lose value over time. It took me many years to understand this. And when I finally began investing, I realized, without a clear financial strategy, I would still be wandering aimlessly, not knowing where I was headed. So, join me in the next part where I'll tell you why a clear financial plan has changed my life. Bad habit 9: dreaming of wealth. Without a plan, I used to be someone with big dreams, but no map in hand. I dreamed of financial freedom, of owning a small house by the beach, of helping others without worrying about money. But every time I faced the question, what is your financial plan? I fell silent. I thought saving regularly was enough. But saving without a goal is like driving without a destination. You can go far, but you don't know where you're going. I realized this when I read the story of Oprah Winfrey. From a poor girl growing up in adversity, Oprah didn't just have big dreams, she had a clear strategy. At every stage in her life, Oprah set specific goals: building a career, investing, expanding her influence. She always knew where she was heading, and that's what made her one of the most powerful women on earth. I began to reflect on myself. I wrote down, I want financial freedom in 10 years. How much do I need each month? What do I have in hand? What's my debt? What investments do I have? That was the first time I faced the entire financial picture of my life. No embellishments, no assumptions. Just the cold, hard truth and my responsibility. I broke down my goals into stages. 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. Each stage had a specific number, a specific savings amount, and a specific investment strategy. I began to build a strategy. I learned how to allocate my income. I committed not just to saving, but to investing regularly. I tracked my cash flow every month, and I dedicated time every week to review my goals, adjusting when necessary. With a clear plan, I no longer saw money as a burden. I saw it as a tool to live a purposeful life. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't chasing get-rich-quick promises. I became the master of my own finances. And if you feel your financial life is tangled, if you keep asking where does my money go and can't answer, pause for a moment. Write down your plan. Define your goals clearly. Don't let the dream of wealth remain a whisper in your head. Make it into a concrete blueprint. Because no one succeeds by accident. Everything starts with a clear plan and a strong commitment. You see, sometimes what holds us back isn't the world outside, but the small, quiet habits inside us. And the best part? We can start changing today. We don't need to be perfect. We don't need to know everything. We just need to be willing to take that first small step. If you're dealing with a financial habit that's worrying you, share it with me in the comments. I read every word you write, and who knows, your story might inspire the next video. And if there's something you're struggling with, from managing finances, personal growth, to questions about the meaning of life, don't hesitate to let me know. I'm here to listen and find answers with you. Remember, you deserve a life that's free, proactive, and full of meaning, and that journey starts with the choice you make today.